Welcome to the RUE Papers.
Right, let's begin. Pay attention, future researcher who's accessing these notes for whatever damned reason. My name is Beatrice Taylor. I work in Ellington Library, which is a private library, which means we have to be extra nice to the patrons. I was not. So I'm stuck down here in the basement to catalogue and record these papers. Ellington Library was converted from a Victorian home, so we have miles of old wine cellars and coal bunkers and probably some poor bastard walled up with a bottle of sherry. And these delightful rooms are filled with research papers no one has ever read. Hardly anyone. A few months ago there was a flood near the Thames, and the basement was almost soaked through. Not quite. And it was decided that somehow these papers had to have a digital recording. They're too fragile to be photographed, apparently. So I have to make a voice recording of each paper, so that you, future researcher, can find whatever you are looking for in here. God help you. And I got sent down here with my laptop and a portable lamp because the electrics down here are fucked. I mean, we have lights, but we try to keep them off, so I have to sit in darkness. Rose, my boss, says this is nothing to do with the fact that I was not grovelling enough to a customer who kept correcting my pronunciation of Somerset Maugham. I was right, by the way, but that I have the right voice. That's bollocks. However, Elaine has a lovely voice, as she often points out, and she's the only one allowed to do the PA announcements. So, I know that reason is bollocks. Just another day in my shitty life. Rose says I'll enjoy it, that I was always more interested in the actual books than customers, and to be fair, she has a point. But down here, what am I going to find? Old receipts for fines? Catalogues for books that don't even exist anymore? A shopping list from 1963? Anyway, let's grab a paper at random. Right, this first paper is about 3 pages long. That strange old foolscap they used to use. You know, the kind that crackles satisfyingly. There's a letterhead at the top. It's too smudged to see it clearly. And a typed heading. It says this is a report from RUE. That's capital R, capital U, capital E. And it's from 10th of August, 1910. Hold on, let me Google this. At least B allowed me to run an Ethernet cable down here so I can access the internet. Though I'm supposed to be using it to save the records in the cloud as I go, not Googling. Okay, it's not RUE, it's R full stop, U full stop, E full stop. And that stands for Research into Unusual Events. A society formed, according to Wikipedia, for research into paranormal and ghostly happenings in order to assess and record them in a scientific manner. Ran from 1879 to 1950. Nothing significant or of any note. Wonder how this ended up down here. I mean, Ellington Library is primarily a library of occult and arcane volumes, according to the founder. And we do have a lot of those on the first floor. 12 copies of This House is Haunted. Shelves of Peter Underwood. An entire run of The Unexplained. And there are a few papers and older volumes up in the attic. But to be honest, most of the people that come in here just stick to the general fiction on the ground floor. I mean, there's a fair few Shirley Jackson and Stephen King books, but also a large collection of Jackie Collins for some reason. We rely a lot on donations. The point is, this feels like the kind of thing that would be kept in the attic. beside Harry Price's papers. Not stuffed in the basement, falling to pieces in the damp. Not that I would know. I never get to work with the arcane books. Is arcane the right word? It feels like the right word. I like the sound of it. No, I work in the fiction section on the ground floor. Robin should be doing this. He loves ghost stories. He's always in that section. Okay, enough chatter. Nice of me to give you a little background though, isn't it? Professional voice on. The report of Daniel Milligan into alleged poltergeist activities at 13 Barnum Street, Bradford. This was a case we had discovered via story in a local newspaper. As you know, we employ newspaper researchers all over the country to notify us of possible cases. The story is attached. There's no article attached. Unsurprising after all this time. To continue. It was a standard poltergeist case. Pots being thrown, words scrawled on walls, obscenities, judging by the refusal of the newspaper to publish the words, scratches appearing on the child. The report was intriguing and there seemed to be no obvious signs of fakery. I went to investigate. My primary reason for this was to establish if the child had psychic abilities that could be useful to RUE, to catalogue another event and check for fraud. We know how every fraudulent case reduces the general belief in our work, and this is not useful. The Mortons, the family affected by the poltergeist, were very typical of the classic family caught up in poltergeist cases. The husband is considerably older than his wife, and this is his second marriage. There is a daughter from the first marriage who has just reached the age of 13. As you can imagine, there are considerably strong emotions in the house, with a young girl approaching adulthood. We often note that poltergeist cases tend to focus on emotionally disturbed children, especially girls. My own feeling is that they manifest the poltergeist themselves, either consciously or subconsciously, and therefore this is not a classic haunting case of someone wishing to reach out from beyond the afterlife. The three of them were eager to meet me and invited me into their home for tea and discussion of their case. I met all three of them in their comfortable and neat sitting room. The girl was shy and awkward and resistant to questioning. I noticed from her school books that were lying around the room that she was well read and intelligent, and I suspect that given the lack of outlets for a woman's intelligence, she may well be frustrated at the future she sees before her. And of course, she has been supplanted in her father's affection by her young and attractive stepmother. However, Mrs. Morton was insistent that the spirit was that of her husband's first wife, citing as evidence some of the words scrawled on the walls. I will not repeat them here, for decency's sake. Only the three of them live here. There is a daily maid, and a laundry woman visits on Mondays, but neither of them live in. Neither of them have witnessed any events, and Mrs. Morton is reluctant to talk to them about it, in case the home gets a bad reputation and maids refuse to work there. They also showed me some broken crockery and talked of the noises in the kitchen late at night. All standard poltergeist activity. They tend to make a lot of mess and noise without showing any signs of intelligence or order about the work. I don't need to tell you any more. It was basically what you would expect. Spoil sport. I didn't know any of this about poltergeists. Then again, my only experience is the movie. Yes, I know I just said there's a lot of ghost stories in this library, but I don't get to work in that section. Not suitable, for some reason. So I don't know anything about this kind of thing. They refused to let me talk to the girl beyond the first few greetings, and certainly not alone. They said she was always asleep in bed whenever the events happened. That yes, she even slept through the night all the plates in the kitchen crashed to the floor. Thinking back to my own childhood, I recall how I would sneak out of bed after dark and roam the local neighbourhood, discovering all sorts of interesting events, including having my first sip of beer. I have no certainty that this child is safely asleep in her bed every night. Why, Daniel Millington, you sound quite a bit more fun than I expected. The The focus of the events is the kitchen, and I offered to sit up tonight and watch. The Mortons asked if they should go to a local hotel for the night, but I refused. If it was indeed the child, I wanted her in the home. However, I did make one stipulation. She was not to be told I was there. Mr. Morton wasn't happy about this, but Mrs. Morton agreed. Therefore, once the child had gone to bed, they left me alone. I set myself up silently in the kitchen, leaving all the doors open so I could see the stairs up to the first floor. I, of course, set up the usual equipment: chalk on the floor, string across the doorway, a thermometer on the table, as well as a torch. Side note, I would like to invest in a camera, perhaps even a motion picture camera for these events. Then I sat and waited. I have spent many nights like these. Sometimes I think I am more at ease at night than in the day. I have sat on soft sofas and stone benches and wooden pews, always at night, always staring into the darkness, always happy with my own thoughts. I have never been afraid. I have seen shadows and lights and dim faces and heard screaming and whispering and prayers, and not once have I been afraid. I was not asleep this night. I was not afraid. Not when the night began. Please remember that. The events began at midnight. A loud thumping from the floor above, as if someone banged on the bedroom floor with a stick. A series of 3 and then another. It stopped. The Mortons rose and trembling came downstairs, despite my instructions not to leave the room. They seemed eager for my opinion. I refused to give it at this early stage. The noise could have been anything. An animal trapped in the wall, the knocking of a neighbour, the child herself. They told me this was how the events always began. I asked them to check that their daughter was in fact asleep. Mrs. Morton said that she had put her head around her bedroom door and saw she was sleeping, but that is not confirmation. Anyone may fake sleep, or even fake their own body in bed whilst they are elsewhere. I asked them to check. However, they insisted on making cocoa before going back to bed, which was frustrating. I lit the gas lamp, but a moment later Mrs. Morton screamed. Words appeared on the wall beside the lamp, ridiculous obscenities, directed at Mrs. Morton and alluding to her behaviour with men. I shan't write them down. You know the kind of words I mean. As they studied the words, shaking with fear, one of the kitchen cupboards sprang open and a pile of plates cascaded out of the kitchen cupboard. The Mortons fled in panic out of the room. In the hallway, I told them I had all I needed for the night, and therefore I would now leave them in peace. In fact, they saw me walk out of the door. I didn't go far. I made a walk to the alleyway behind the house and waited by the back door, listening. Once they were in their room again, and I heard them tell the child I had left, I picked the lock and went back into the kitchen. I believe I have mentioned more than once that the most interesting events happen when people have no idea there is anyone observing. I tidied up the room, resetting the chalk on the floor and the thread across the door. I studied the room carefully. Now I knew what to look for. I hid behind a cupboard, shaded by the coats hanging on the back door, and waited for the child to come downstairs. She did so at 3 a.m., believing herself to be alone. I watched as she wiped heat-activated ink from the wall and removed the spring-loaded device that had toppled the plates. I confronted her at that moment. She sulkily admitted that, yes, she had faked the whole case. She had created the ink at school and read magician's books to learn how to fake the crashing of crockery, the movement of tables, the sound seemingly far away from her. She had built some quite ingenious devices. In truth, I was impressed. Ah, clever girl. I gave her a good telling off in a whisper so as not to awaken the parents, and told her this was a very bad way to behave. She replied that she had only done it because she had been told to do it by her mother. I told her that although her mother was dead, her stepmother took care of her, and that was who she ought to listen to. She didn't reply. She merely smiled, and I have never seen such a disturbing smile on the face of any human being. I realized she was not looking at me, but behind me. I felt my spine freeze. I have been in many dangerous situations, and I have never felt such certainty that I was being watched, and what was watching me wished me harm. Every nerve twitched, begging me to run. I did not run. I turned around. Through the open kitchen door I saw the hall. It had been dark before, but faintly lit by moonlight. Now the darkness was black, impenetrable. Every hint of light was gone. The shadows were a solid thing, and there were many of them. I saw tendrils of something black and smoky reach out to wrap themselves around the banister and pull themselves towards me. There was no shape, only the thing reaching out towards me with many limbs. I felt the air in the room go out. I was not short of breath through fear. I felt the air leave. I felt my lungs start to suffocate as if a great weight was placed on me. I could not move, only watch and strain for breath as the darkness reached the kitchen door and the air turned to ice. What little breath I had turned to vapour in the air on this warm August night. I tried to move. I felt my muscles twitch, and yet they would not respond. I stood as still as a statue. I could only watch as the tendrils wrapped themselves around my legs, my arms, my head, and I saw the little girl open her arms wide and welcome the shadows to her before the darkness shaded my eyes and the tendrils wove themselves down into my throat. No wisps of smoke now. This was a thick, choking gas that tasted bitter on my tongue. Into my horror, I felt the darkness enter my mind. This is not a metaphor, Cheveley. I know as you are reading this report, you doubt me, and yet I felt it rummage through my most precious memories and take what it needed. I could feel it pause on my moments of horror and terrible sights I have seen, and I felt its scorn as I remembered moments of love and warmth. I have never been so certain I would die, and yet at that moment I welcomed death, if it would mean escape from this vile thing. And then I became aware of one thing, one overwhelming certainty. I was not worthy. I was not chosen. And even as I felt relief, I felt a curious disappointment. The tendrils withdrew. The darkness withdrew and the air returned. As soon as I could breathe, I darted forward and lit the gas lamps with a shaking hand. I asked the girl what that was, and she merely replied, "My mother." I made a move towards the door to tell her parents, but she told me to stop. It made no difference now, she said. She would stop the tricks. It didn't matter now, she told me. In just a few years it would all be over. I asked her what she meant by that, but she merely smiled. I am ashamed to say that I packed up and left that moment, waiting at the train station for 2 hours for the first train. I have never felt such fear, and I have no scientific explanation. Whatever you say, Chiefly, not everything can be explained by our science as it is now. I have an addendum. I was not going to add this, but I remember our rules. Everything must be recorded. The girl spoke to me as I left, but it was not her voice, not her tone or intonation. She told me that I had been touched and rejected, and therefore I was cursed if I told anyone what had happened. I did not want to tell you that. Even now the keys of the typewriter entangle themselves and the ink smudges on the paper. My entire mind and body scream at me to stop, and yet one little tiny corner of my soul, perhaps the corner that made that creature reject me, insists I write this to you. and that is the end of it. I do not believe in any such curse, of course. Now, in the light of day, and in a busy office, feet away from my comrades in scientific research. But if I am cursed, then let this be my testimony, and I will face the curse head on and defy it. I refuse to be cowed. Okay. Wow. That was not what I was expecting to read. That was disturbing. Is it real? Is it just something someone made up, some kind of creative exercise? Let me Google this guy. I mean, 1910, he probably died in the war. Being a librarian, I have access to all kinds of records, and I feel I owe it to you, future researcher, to give you some kind of update. And here it is. Fuck. I found a newspaper report. He disappeared. Literally disappeared. According to this, he was saying going in his front door and his family heard his steps in the hall, but then silence. They opened the door and he was gone. Just vanished. Never seen again. The date, it's only a few days after his report. Let me find the family, the poltergeist family. No, I can't find anything, not under those parameters. I mean, he did say the case was in the papers, but perhaps he changed the details. Or it could have been just a local newspaper that closed after a few years and was never archived online. Let me check the other boxes. There's a whole box marked RUE here. A whole shelf full of boxes. Wait, let me get the lights. Just for a moment. They're all RUE. Boxes and boxes of them. How many ghost stories are down here? Don't worry, future researcher. I'll read them all. Thank you for listening to the RUE Papers. Created, written and performed by Emma Butler. For bonus materials, please visit my Patreon. And don't forget, listeners, some stories should never be read.